Hello all and welcome, and I am the MGTOW philosopher. In today's video I would like to talk about something that really gets on my nerves when I hear this, and that is the subject of women being less violent than men. I was recently talking to someone, and this woman, she said, oh yeah, well, you know, if women ruled the world, there would be no wars. And you know, it's the old song and dance that women are superior to men, that they're more even-minded and diplomatic, and that if women were in charge, there would be no social problems, there would be no problems, period, and violence would go the way of the dodo, and you'd have world utopia, and nobody would starve to death, everything would be perfect. The only problem with that argument is that it's horseshit, and we all know it. Any of us that have lived with a woman, been in a relationship with a woman, we all know what a sense of entitlement they have to do whatever their feelings tell them to do. And when they get angry, they swing away, they throw stuff, they grab stuff to use as weapons, like a child would do, because in many ways they're very childlike, generally speaking, when it comes to controlling their emotions. So they just lose it, flip out, and just go with the flow of their feelings. And any man knows this. And for any woman, they might say, oh, well, that's not true. How many women have you dated? If you're a lesbian, you especially know this is true, because the lesbian domestic violence epidemic is even worse than the heterosexual one, because these are two women together, and one woman, she's not afraid of the man's greater strength. They're both equally weak or equally strong, depending on how you look at it. So there's really no deterrent there. So they beat the hell out of each other. It's really a big problem, actually, in lesbian relationships. You should do some research into that, because it's a huge issue. So women are very violent. They're very, very violent. And the reason that you don't hear about this is for a number of different factors. For one thing, women have less strength than men. So when they are violent, they don't do as much harm. Yeah, slap to the face, threw a vase at me and it broke on me. Whoop-de-doo. Number two is that men tend to be stoic. We tend to take it. We've been taught A, not to hit women, B, to shrug off pain, C, to be strong, and D, to feel shame about what's happening to us if a woman's harming us. And we've been taught not to report it, not to tell anybody, because we will be shamed by society. Everybody knows that's true. And of course, men are men. We are bigger, we are stronger, we are able to take more physical abuse. That's what we're made for. It's that simple. So, to say that women are not as violent as men is a lie. What that really means is people, men, don't report it when they have had violence done to them. As they've been taught their whole life, you know, don't hit girls, protect girls, women are special, men are scum, you know, you deserve it, you're horrible, you're an oppressor. And they've had this narrative drummed into their head. So men, not only do they not fight back, but they don't report when they are abused. And if they are abused, and they do report it, they tend not to be taken seriously. And oftentimes the injuries are not as serious as they would be with a woman, or perhaps there are no visible injuries, immediately speaking. So nothing gets done. It just gets downplayed and swept under the rug, because the police, the authorities have more serious issues to deal with, meaning the woman just didn't do enough damage to you for us to really take this seriously and press charges against her. Even worse, a man could very easily be arrested if he was to call the police on a woman for abusing him. I mean, that's a huge risk. You can just say he abused me, and then he goes to jail, even though he's the one with injuries. It's really absurd. And the criminal justice system favors women, looks down on men. Everybody knows this. Everybody in the Western world especially. It's a matriarchy. And so you add in the fact that women are entitled, that they really aren't held accountable for their actions. Not very often, really. And, you know, they're very emotional. And so, of course, they're going to be more violent because they do have this entitlement. They do have this lack of accountability. They know they can get away with it, you know, and they have this anger that has come from feminism teaching them. I mean, women have always been violent. Always, but it really ramped up with feminism because, you know, they didn't need a man anymore. You know, you can treat men like crap, and if they don't like it, get the hell out of there, and the state can take care of me. So there are a lot of factors that play into why people have this erroneous belief that women are less violent than men, but it's actually not true. And I'd like to read an article that I found that is very interesting because it talks about some UK scientists, and these are real scientists in this specific field in the UK, which is like uber feminist. I mean, you think America is feminist. I mean, feminism in the UK is like feminism on steroids. And so for these guys to come up with these kind of results in a country that is that alienated toward men and that matriarchal, you know that they have to know their shit and be on the money with their analysis. Otherwise, they would just be killed. And of course, they probably were killed anyway because it's a feminist country. So, you know, facts don't matter, just feelings. But anyway, let's begin at the beginning of this article. Bruised and battered husbands. First of all, what's the title? Women are more violent, says study. Yes. Bruised and battered husbands have been complaining for years, and now the biggest research project of its kind has proved them right. So first of all, there has been research done on this. It's just been swept under the rug, hidden. The results of many studies have been not discussed, not released to the public, just quietly swept aside because they were inconvenient facts, essentially. And of course, bruised and battered husband complaining. Not a lot of husbands complain. As I said before, they tend to keep their mouths shut. They don't want to talk about this. And I've seen women hitting men out in public plenty of times. Women don't really have any concern about this. I mean, I've seen, and maybe all of you out there, I'm sure many of you have seen this, where a woman hit a man, nobody does anything. Now imagine the situation reversed. Well, you'd have to imagine it because you never see it. You don't see it. I've never seen a man, I think maybe one time in my whole life, and it wasn't in a Western country, by the way, where a man hit a woman, and when he did, everybody immediately swarmed him and held him down. And I've plenty of situations where I have seen a woman hit a man, and nobody did anything but laugh at him. And I've seen women attack men, and nobody stops the woman, they just laugh. Men have become a joke, even though we built the whole goddamn world. Ridiculous. But let's continue. So, the biggest research project of its kind has proven them right. When it comes to domestic confrontation, this study has proven that women are more violent than men, which is something we all already know. We all already know that women are highly emotional, while men are highly controlled. We know that women are subjective, while men are more objective. We know that men are more calculating and logical and reasonable, and that women are more all about empathy and feelings and acting upon those feelings. We know this. We know that men are aware there are consequences. Society tacitly approves it by doing nothing. Women know this. We know that Western countries are a majority of matriarchy and that women are treated different. If you just look at the number of women in prison compared to men, it's too large a number of 10% to 90%, 90% men. There's something wrong there because men are not this much more inclined to crime and violence. In fact, it's even or women are more violent. And yes, a lot of criminals in jail are not in jail for violence, but a large number are. And of course, if you look at the criminal justice system, it's far more stilted toward men in terms of punishment being serious than women. Women get far lighter sentences and are more likely to get very little jail time or no jail time at all. So men know that the system is stacked against them. Hence, they have motivation to be less violent. Women have, no motivation to be less violent. And there's no real consequences if they're more violent, and they're emotional in nature to begin with, so why not? And quite honestly, that's the kind of conclusion any logical, reasonable person could come to looking at the facts. You don't need a study, but this study and others point out what we already know by using common sense. The study, which challenges the long-standing view that women are overwhelmingly the victims of aggression, is based on an analysis of, now get this, this is not a small sample size, people. It's based on an analysis of 34,000 men and women by a British academic. 34,000! It's not like this is a small number. This isn't like a few people in a survey or something where you're padding the survey by asking all Democrats, what do you think of Trump? Do you like Trump? No, this is a very broad and large sample size. Women lash out more, so 34,000 men and women. Women tend to lash out more frequently than their husbands or boyfriends, concludes John Archer, professor of psychology at the University of Central Lancashire and president of the International Society for Research on Aggression. So this guy knows what he's talking about. While male violence remains a serious phenomenon, men prove more likely than women to injure their partners. So the disparity between violence from men and violence from women was not about quantity of violence, meaning who's more violent and who's less violent, but more about who could do more damage, you see. So female aggression tends to involve the exact same aggression you get from men. So this is pushing, slapping, hurling objects. We all know that women are much more likely to use weapons. So the disparity between who gets injured during violence happening is not as big as you might think, because men made up 40% of victims in the cases that he studied in terms of being injured. So that's not a huge disparity. Okay, and this disparity, so 60% of victims that suffered injury were women. All right, 40% men, but this was in an equal comparison between men and women who had suffered domestic violence. So the difference can be, the difference is down to physical strength. So the difference to 40 to 60 in terms of number of injuries is simply down to men being stronger, not being more violent. And that's an important distinction to make, okay? Men are not more violent, they're simply stronger. That's it. So that when they do become violent, they tend to do more damage. But it's not as much as you might have thought, 60-40. So women, the reason it's so close is because they tend to use weapons. And anybody that's been in a relationship knows this. Grab whatever's nearby, throw something, have a tantrum, lash out, grab something and attack the man. But it's not just about their physical strength. As I said before, men are more robust and can take more damage, so are less likely to suffer injury. Now, Professor Archer analyzed data. He went even further. What I just told you was from his study. Then he went on to study data from 82 US and UK studies on relationship violence. 82! His results are not just from his own study, but from 82 US and UK studies going back to 1972. And he also looked at 17 more studies. 17 more studies primarily focused only on victim reports of 1,140 men and women. And he said the female aggression was greater in westernized countries because they were economically emancipated and therefore not afraid of ending the relationship, meaning that they have very poor impulse control. Okay? And that honestly, they don't need to worry about consequences, which is what I just said. There's very little, if any, accountability for a woman hitting a man, especially if it's her husband. In fact, much less if it's her husband. I mean, at least if she hits a stranger out in public, she might suffer some kind of consequence. But her husband, he won't report it. He'll be afraid of being shamed. Now, feminist writers say most of the acts against men, most of the violent acts against men by women are not important. Of course they do, because feminists hate men. But the same people have used the same surveys to inflate the number of women who are attacked, meaning that the very same surveys that pointed to more violence against men and an almost equal number of injuries to men by women were discounted, but the same information was used to make women look like victims. What a surprise! In the past, it would not have been considered that women are violent. My view is that we must base social policy on the whole evidence. Basically, right, what he's saying is you don't cherry pick your evidence to fit the conclusion that you want. Now, his views are supported by Dr. Malcolm George, a lecturer in neuroscience at London University, another scientist from another UK-based university. These studies have been peer-reviewed, by the way, and published in actual, actually published results on this subject that have been peer-reviewed. This is not some fringe nut job calling himself a scientist. This is over 100 studies now that are all saying the same thing. In a paper to be published next year in the Journal of Men's Studies, Dr. George will argue that men have been abused by their wives since Elizabethan times. He uses examples such as the actor John Wayne, who was beaten by his wife, Conchita Martinez, and Humphrey Bogart, who was battered by his wife, Mayo Mathot, as well as Abraham Lincoln. If you looked at his picture and seen that fucked up nose of his, you want to know who gave it to him? His wife, who broke it with a lump of wood. Now imagine for a second how much of a demon that Abraham Lincoln would be made out to be if he had busted his wife's nose with a lump of wood. But because it was her that broke his nose, she's not looked at as some kind of demon. In fact, nobody knows about it. Well, why is that? It doesn't advance anyone's agenda who's in power. No, no, no. But if he had broken her nose, I guarantee you, he would be vilified and demonized by the left and everybody and called a monster and a horrible person. Now, Dr. Malcolm George's research is backed by historical records, which show that men who were beaten by their wives were publicly humiliated in a ceremony called a skimmington process. The procession was named after the ladle used to skim milk during cheese. Actually, there were a varied number of ways that men were humiliated ceremonially in medieval and Elizabethan times, and really all throughout history. In medieval times, it was quite common if a man was beaten by his wife and it became public knowledge, he would be tied up, strapped to the back of a mule, facing backwards, and be ridden around town, people throwing fruit and shit at him and basically yelling insults and epithets at him. And there was another ceremony. People would go to their house at night, bang pots and pans and yell insults at the man because he didn't control his wife. And you can see this on frescoes and on tapestries all throughout history from these periods in Europe of women abusing men. They're all over this in artwork throughout Middle Age and even later artwork throughout Western culture. You can find this in art, in historical accounts throughout European history. So, and American history too. Men were routinely shamed by the public. Shamed, shamed, shamed. Shamed by their neighbors, looked down upon, disrespected. So men have been socialized to keep quiet, not say anything, not to let other people know, otherwise they will look bad and they will be shamed by their neighbors. It was a stigma to be abused by your wife, essentially blaming the victim. But women, oh no. Now, and at least women, it's been equal throughout history. If you studied any type of history, you know if you're going through historical accounts, you will find as many or more instances of men abusing their wives than you do of wives abusing their husbands than you will of husbands abusing their wives. You see, even I, when I'm trying to recount truth, unconsciously say the men doing it instead of the women doing it more. And it's not true, but it's been so ingrained into our brains. But if you do any research on history, you will find it's not true. It's the exact opposite, that women are the more violent of our species. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's not about testosterone or muscle mass, or the man is more aggressive, or, you know, and quite frankly, we are more capable of violence, but we have more self-control than women, and we're not as emotional. So those are irrelevancies, quite frankly. And it's a complex argument, he goes on to say, but we do get more aggression against male partners than against female partners when looking at the data, said Dr. George. The view is that women are acting in self-defense by society, but that's not true. 50% or more of those who initiate aggression are women. Now, this sends a dangerous message to men, because we are saying they are not going to get any legal redress, so their option instead is to hit back. Which, of course, men don't really do that very often, because they're afraid of some kind of criminal prosecution, or that the authorities will side with the women, which is usually true. As I said, our criminal justice system is stilted against men. Now, Terry Moffat, professor of social behavior at the Institute of Psychiatry at King's College London, admitted that women do engage in abusive behavior, and said the Home Office should fund research into the issue in the UK. Sounds more like a politician to me. Research has already been done by independent scientists, independent researchers. The information I just gave you was from over 100 studies, yet this woman is basically, we'll do some research into the subject. Yeah, she doesn't want to look into it for fear of harming her career. She doesn't want to comment on it either. Just gives the usual, we need to look into doing a study, instead of actually giving any firm answer on the research that is already right there and has been found in over 100 studies and then over a 40-year period. But she doesn't want to address it, nor does anyone, it seems. Which points to us living in a matriarchal society that nobody seems to want to talk about, because, of course, the matriarchs are in charge. You want to know who's in charge? Don't give me any of this white privilege bullshit or any of that. Look at who you're not allowed to talk about, what you're not allowed to talk about, who you're not allowed to criticize. And then you'll know who is in charge. Now, if we ask, does women's violence have consequences for their kids? Then the answer is yes, of course. If there's abuse in a household, it's more likely the kids will be abused, or that they will learn from example and become abusers themselves. Right, there is also an elevated risk of children being victims of domestic violence if there is a central violence between parents, and of course it's more likely they will be domestic abusers when they grow up. Duh. And one last paragraph. However, Dr. Ann Campbell, a psychologist at the University of Durham, said that women should still receive... She's noticed that none of these people are arguing against the results of these studies, because they've been reviewed, they've been peer-reviewed, they've been proven to be statistically true. She's a scientist. She doesn't argue that, but she tries to get her brownie points in with women and still argue the feminist point of view and support the women over the men by saying that the outcome of violence is that women are more damaged by it, and they still need the bulk of resources. Yeah, what she's saying there is that because women still suffer more harm, they should still get more help. She goes on with a little caveat, though, to say, but women's violence has been increasingly legitimized. There's a sense now that it's okay to slap the bastard. Bitch, please. Women's violence goes well beyond slapping somebody. All you're trying to do now is minimize it and make it look like it's less than it really is. Remember, the comparison, all these studies showed that 60 to 40, it's not a humongous difference. It's not like 10%, 90%. 40% of men abused by women are suffering injury. compared to 60% of women who were abused suffering injury. So it's not a gigantic chasm, okay? And what this means is that women are doing a hell of a lot more than slapping the bastard. So you are not looking at the evidence in an unbiased way, and you're clearly trying to save your own little career by pandering to the women and sticking to the party line, as it were. Women use weapons. Women are more likely to use weapons. And this study proves that women are more likely to be violent, not less likely. And another study confirmed this, a historical study of queens in Europe over a period from 1480 to 1913. New York University scholars analyzed 28 European queens from 1480 to 1913. You know what they found? They found that women were 27, in these cases queens, we'll use the word queens, that these queens, when they were ruling, there was a 27% increase in wars when a queen was in power as compared to the reign of a king. So, the varied countries in Europe at different times had a queen instead of a king. So they compared the reigns of queens compared to the reign of kings. Now, of course, there can be varying factors that could contribute to there being less violence, less war at one period than in another. Could be economic reasons, could be cultural reasons. There could be a number of things that vary from century to century, generation to generation, that could contribute to the possibility of war breaking out, or there not being war. However, it would not be this large a statistical anomaly if it was just random chance and happenstance, or a small number that you could just attribute to random chance. 27% is not statistically small or an anomaly. That's a trend. That would be called a trend, okay? And what that proves is that women, when given the power to use violence, use it more. And we have 100+ studies over a 45-year period to prove that. Not to mention a look at female rulers, when they had the power to use violence, they used it 27% more of the time. And this wasn't just in one country. This was in varied countries throughout Europe over a very long period, more than 400 years. So, quite a long time. Yeah. So let's not say, let's not continue sticking to the old line that women are not as violent as men and the world would be better off if women were in charge. No, the world would be much worse off if women were in charge, generally speaking. Though there is that rare unicorn that is the exception to the rule, the real rule is women are much more violent than men. Excuse me, women are much more violent than men. Women are much more prone to become violent. And women tend to be more likely to solve their problems with violence than with logic and reason. And we live in a society now in Western countries where men are almost like second-class citizens and women are seen as somehow superior to men. It's literally a matriarchy, and women have no real accountability for their actions. So this, in a way, gives them tacit approval to be violent, to be more violent. But don't fool yourself. Even before the advent of feminism becoming so powerful, women were just as violent as men in the past, but now they're more violent because they've been given free rein by our man-hating society. And the fact that they don't really have to worry or care about men anymore, and there's no consequences to being that way. Because so many men have become pussified wimps, a lot of them take the abuse, they have a lot of internalized self-hate. Being men, it's no surprise the way society teaches them how evil men are. They have so much self-hate that many of them are becoming these transsexuals, with this internalized hate toward men, this negative view of men. Men are so bad, men are so horrible, you get treated like crap. Some people just, why not become a woman, right? And then you get treated like a victim, and now you're a woman, and that's the favored class. That's one reason why transsexualism has become so big. But anyway, so that is the truth. It's a truth we men have always known. Those of us that have a brain, not the cucks out there who have been gelded by women, and the white knights out there who tend to form their worldview around how wonderful women are just so they can get laid. No. Women are more violent than men, and quite a bit more. Quite a bit more. So don't believe that the world would be a better place if women were in charge. Do some research, look at history, look at some of the historical shaming tactics that were enacted in old European countries, that these small communities they lived in would enact against the man if he was letting his wife beat him. Look at the shaming tactics throughout the world. I mean, at least a woman in ancient times could count on the community to do something to the man if he beat her bad enough. I mean, at least he would get strapped to a pole and given 20, 30 lashes. The man, he would get shamed and humiliated. So this view that feminists have given us of a world being a better place if women were in charge and that women are less violent than men is absolute horseshit. Absolute horseshit. And this is statistical proof of that you won't see on any news broadcast, but anything bad said about men is going to get center stage attention with big headlines and every news station running a story on it. Don't be fooled, people. Think for yourself and do the research. I'm the practical philosopher, also known as the MGTOW philosopher, and I wish you a good night.